Welcome to the Pacific Wayfinder podcast, your guide to navigating the cross currents of security in the Blue Pacific continent.
Bula vinaka, Maori, ali'i, welcome, talofa. Thank you for joining us on the Pacific Wayfinder podcast. I'm Joel Nilon, Senior Pacific Fellow at the Pacific Security College. It's my pleasure to host our podcast this afternoon. It's great to be with you. Now, across the Pacific region, we face a range of threats to our peace and security, the most urgent of which include climate change, transnational and organized crime, the proliferation of hard drugs, and food and water security, amongst others. These threats can be exacerbated by political and geopolitical competition, and also by global conflicts like the war in Iran, which has impacted fuel availability, driven up fuel prices across the globe and across our region, and which has had all sorts of flow on impacts on the daily lives of Pacific people. Now, the Pacific Fusion Center, based in Port Vila, Vanuatu, has recently co published and released the 2026 Pacific Security Outlook Report in conjunction with the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. The report analyzes in more detail these threats to our peace and security, and also offers recommendations for how our leaders can address them. To discuss the report in detail, it is my pleasure to welcome our guests to the podcast this afternoon, Mr. Viliame Bovoro, the director of the Pacific Fusion Center, as well as Papali'i, Monalisa Tiai-Keti, the assistant director at the Pacific Fusion Center, again based in Port Vila, Vanuatu. Vili, Monalisa, good afternoon and welcome to you both. How are you doing?
Well, Bulvinaka, Joel, and really it's a pleasure to be on this podcast this afternoon and have the opportunity to discuss some of the things that we've covered in the Outlook report, and really looking forward to the discussion ahead. Thanks, Joel.
Good afternoon, Joel. Would also like to echo director's comments. We're very excited to be part of today's program and share our views in regards to the recent published piece or report. So very excited, and thank you for bringing us along to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Papali'i, and also congratulations to you on your recent appointment as assistant director. It's really wonderful to have you here in the position. Can I say too, congratulations to the Pacific Fusion Center and also, I guess, your co-publishers, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, on the publication of the report. It is sobering reading in many ways, but I guess it's really important that we have a clear picture and a clear understanding of the range of threats to our national and regional security across the Pacific. So, thank you both again for this work. If I may, if we can just get into some of the details and the substance of the report. I just want to start by this idea of polycrisis that you set out in the report. Polycrisis is a situation in which many threats or crises, come together and converge and overlap and interact with each other. Maybe I can ask you both, which combinations of threats and crises worry you most for the people of the Pacific over the coming years? Thank you.
Really, for us, I think the polycrisis was really first coined by Prime Minister Rambuka, or he used it back in 2024. I think at one of the colleges, those the regional conference that was held back then in Suva in Fiji. But he really used the lens polycrisis to look at the intersection between climate change, transnational crime, and human security. Which is what he sort of covered, and I think that still remains true today, yeah, in terms of the key challenges that are facing the region. But to me nowadays, everything that we're sort of contending with now is continuously being sharpened. And as we've said in the report, we're seeing that all across all of the 9 sort of thematic areas that we look at, everything seems to be deteriorating across the region, and that is really, I guess, the confluence of what this polycrisis is. I know that it was originally coined as the nexus between climate change, transnational crime, and human security, but I would even say that to me, it's really about the impact of a number of drivers, more broader than just those 3. I mean, the things like the flow-on impact that it has on economic security, the sort of ramping up of militarization or securitization in the Pacific, which is it is detracting from Pacific priorities. Like I know that people always say in the Pacific we are worried about putting bread and butter on the table, sending our kids to school, but this polycrisis and how things are beginning to deteriorate across all of this range of security threats and trends is having an impact on our ability to do that. And I think things are, for me, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but it seems that given the way that we are currently heading, a lot of this will continue to worsen, rather than become better in the next few years. So it's really, I think, more broader than just looking at transnational crime, climate change, and human security. But then really it's incumbent upon us to really see how we as a region can organize ourselves collectively to address some of these threats.
Thank you very much, Vili. Monalisa, turn
Yeah.
to you for your views.
If I may add, I think as director says, it's such a good opportunity for the region to really look at all the 9 thematic areas that are articulated in the report. One thing that the region needs to be aware of is we cannot just focus on one particular area, but rather understanding how all of this security concerns affect the whole region, whether it be climate change, TNOC, or human security. We need to ensure that the other areas that are highlighted in the reports are not forgotten or not looked upon. So it's important, right from our political leaders all the way down to those in the community. They need to really understand how this, not one issue can be dealt with. It needs to be understood holistically, so that whatever decision or whatever response that the region needs to provide or needs to consider in terms of what we are facing now at this point in time, it needs to be done from a collective perspective. So that's why, for us, it's very important to highlight this in the report so that there is a collective input and collective solution, and how we can, as a region, resolve all these issues.
Thank you so much, Monalisa. And I guess you're both saying that when it comes to the collective, it's not just about 18 member countries. It's also about the different actors within our communities, right? It's not just the role of government to be responding to these issues and these threats, but there's a role for others in our community to play. I think that's a really important point you're making there. Thank you for that. I think it sets the scene and the tone for our discussion this afternoon. I wanted to turn to another key theme in the report, climate change. And I know in the report you identify climate change as the single greatest threat to the security of the Pacific, and you, I guess, align yourself with statements of forum leaders in saying that. But I guess it'd be good to just discuss for you, how does this understanding fundamentally reshape or change what security means for Pacific governments and people compared to some of the more traditional approaches to security. Yeah.
Thanks, Joel. Maybe I'll take this, and then of course Monalisa can add to things that I've missed, which I no doubt will. But to me, really, climate change, as we often say, it's a threat multiplier. It basically, very similar to what the polycrisis or that type of effect. It accelerates or multiplies a lot of the other risks or threats that we're already facing in the Pacific. So if you look at, for instance, when we have natural disasters, climate change is making natural disasters more severe, more frequent, and more acute. And if you overlay this with a security lens, basically it will change the way that that we want security actors to be responding to such types of crises. We've seen in the past. I mean, I'm just talking about impacts on the way that the security sector is planned for these events. Usually, the security sector has been very and defense have been focused on getting capabilities like warfighting capabilities for the region. This has now shifted because of the impact of climate change. You will see more and more countries that have militaries. They are developing their capability to be able to respond to humanitarian assistance and disaster response type situations, more so than like having capability to fight wars. And this is coming more and more to the fore. But really, I think the way that climate change has really reshaped the way that our countries think about security is along these lines. If you look at how countries are now planning for relocation within their countries as a result of sea level rise, it's gone a step beyond just moving people from one location to another. Now there's to be an assessment, a security assessment carried out about the potential lines of conflict that can arise when you're moving a community from here to a new location. The issues around land, issues around resettling them, when the receiving community sees the incoming community receiving government assistance, housing, what type of impact does it have on the receiving community at their end? So I guess there's a lot of considerations. It requires a much more broader planning rather than just the traditional security sector. And I think there's still a need for us to strengthen how the security sector plugs into the overall planning at government level on how they can address climate change. And again, Joel, to the point that you talked about earlier, it's not just going to be a government and law enforcement security. It has to be a full, like a whole of community or a whole of nation type of approach to some of these threats that we are now facing.
Thank you very much, Vili. Very comprehensive response. Monalisa, I'll turn to you for anything to add. Thank you.
I think in terms of our region, we have the largest ocean in the whole world, and we are seeing firsthand the impact of climate change in terms of sea level rising and how our small island nations all over the Pacific are trying to adapt and be resilient in terms of responding to all these climate change effects that is affecting the region. In terms of, I think, to add on to what Director has indicated is, there's a lot of efforts that are being done, especially for countries that are now being affected by climate change, as to how they ensure that they not only survive but maintain their cultures and traditions. And we look at, I think, Tuvalu, who's doing efforts around ensuring that, with what's happening in terms of the impact of climate change, for the future generation not to lose their cultures and their tradition. So those are, in terms of when we're talking about climate change, is not just sea level rising. There's a whole lot of issues that government and the communities need to look at to ensure that they can continue to maintain and hold on to their traditions, even though our region has very little contribution to what's happening in terms of climate pollution. But our people are being resilient and finding ways to adapt to all these changes that are happening.
If we can change gears a little bit and just move to a third sort of area of focus from the report around issues related to managing geopolitical competition, and we know that the intensifying competition between major powers in our region has led in part to a rise of bilateral security agreements between powers and some of our Pacific Island countries. I think in that context, I do want to ask you both how Pacific Island countries can maintain regional unity as a group, and also avoid the fragmentation of their security architecture that can potentially happen when there's an increasing focus on security agreements at a more bilateral level.
I think the work that's being done in the region is always respecting sovereignty, but also making sure that our political leaders understand that when we are looking at climate change, transnational organized crime, it cannot be dealt with by just one country. It's affecting all of us. So there needs to be a collective approach as to how we deal with these situations. Of course, the geopolitical competition in the region and the increase of bilateral arrangements that are being done, especially around the traditional security areas, is one that's it's a discretion for each own country, but what is important is making sure that the political governments must understand that to resolve all this or to better address all these regional issues that we are facing, it requires, like I said before, a holistic and a whole of region approach.
For me, it's really around transparency, I guess, which has been some of the concerns around some of the bilateral agreements that some of our countries have entered into. Of course, as Monalisa said, it is the sovereign right of our members to undertake these bilateral agreements. But I guess given that we are all part of this Pacific family, having transparency around some of the agreements will go a long way. And I must say as well, we've not only seen an increase between Pacific Island countries and external partners, but even within the Pacific family themselves. We've seen Australia enter into a number of bilateral agreements. We've seen even like Papua New Guinea with Solomon Islands with Fiji, and vice versa. And as has been shared by Monalisa, and this is all in response to this intensifying competition. But I think if there is, most of our countries now have national security policies, and a lot of our countries enter into these arrangements based on their national security policies. So for me, building understanding and transparency around these bilateral agreements, will only enhance the linkages between that and the collective things that they've agreed to.
No, fully agree with you both, and fully agree. It's really about transparency that continues to allow trust and confidence amongst those who have the sovereign right to act bilaterally, but also exist within a broader family, where collective action remains so important. Thank you very much to you both for those again very comprehensive responses. I guess staying on the theme of the interaction of broader global dynamics in our region. We've also seen a lot of commentary recently in relation to conflicts that are happening all around the world right now, whether that's in Gaza or Ukraine or even recently in Iran. Some of this commentary, I guess, suggests that we're seeing maybe an erosion or even a collapse of the global rules-based order. Probably from a Pacific perspective, what do you think this means in terms of the erosion of global rules for us in the Pacific, especially given that we have traditionally relied on international law and the multilateral system in order to guarantee and advance our security agenda.
Thanks, Joel. From my perspective, and also, I mean, we've highlighted this in the report as well. I agree. There is an erosion of the global rules-based order. I think this started, I guess, a decade ago. When you see the actions by China and Russia, in the way that they've been testing the global's rules-based order. I always use the analogy that the rules-based order is like a rubber band. Actors or big powers, they are able to stretch that rubber band in the direction that they want, but hopefully they don't break the rubber band. And we are seeing that. People say that, I guess, that China and Russia are revisionist powers, meaning that they want to revise the global order. I take a view that this may, to some extent, Russia is trying to disrupt the global order, while China seeks to act within the global rules-based order, which it's to their benefit, and then use other means when they see it's more better for their national interest. But what is surprising now, Joel, is that the US, as one of the founders of this global rules-based order, is now also playing a part in, I wouldn't say eroding it, but maybe, using it in ways, I don't want to say it, but innovative ways, I guess, in how they are prosecuting some of their efforts around security and how they are progressing this current administration's America First. But that being said, when you bring it back to the Pacific, Joel, people always think that we are a passive onlooker to all these things, but that is far from the truth. We have our values that are sort of enshrined by the Pacific Way that we all allude to. I personally think that the Pacific Way that was evident in 1970 when the forum was formed needs to be updated to the current environment that we now find ourselves in. And I think there needs to be another discussion by our leaders or all of our countries in what the Pacific Way now means for us today. In particular, when we have a number of declarations that are coming now, like the Blue Pacific Ocean of Peace. I always another analogy that I always say is that the Pacific has a lot of carrots, but not enough sticks, and that is why we are so dependent on this rules-based order. But if the very people who have created this and who have stood it up are now themselves testing it and trying to shift it, it takes away from what we always say, that we respect the rules-based order based on the UN Charter, which has always been and I think looking forward, and it's then the report that there are new emerging issues that will continue to test this rules-based order within the Pacific. We are already seeing it being tested around climate change. We are seeing it being tested around the trade rules that we have. But I think there are other things that are coming up now, like critical minerals, space, the use of space, and also emerging technologies. And these are things that are also highlighted in the report, where I think these types of discussions on how global governance, and then in effect how that will impact the way that the Pacific sort of addresses or deals with these things, these will come to the fore in the near future.
Thank you, Vili. Monalisa, anything further?
I think given that director is adding quite a few analogies, and when we're talking about a collective response, I think what comes to mind also is probably how, and I keep referring to Hepeli Aofa because I think he made a really good observation about the strength of the Pacific when they come together. And rather than the perception that we are just islands in the sea, we are a sea of islands, and collectively we are more stronger in terms of voicing Pacific needs at an international level, and a lot of what is happening around the world does impact us, and we're seeing it with the energy crisis that is affecting us. Although we are quite far away from the Strait of Hormuz, but in the impact that we are now feeling really calls for us to come together, and especially for our political leaders to really see how important it is for the region to address international issues from a collective. And I think this is the best opportunity as to highlight our regional voice to the superpowers.
I think what you just said there, Monalisa, I think is the vision for our region. From the days of the founding of the forum, even prior to that, through what Epeli Hawofa has been writing on, and through to today, being able to make the most of norms and values and the way we come together through something like Pacific Way to even our own more formal governance. I see leaders have opted to invoke Biketawa not long ago as a way to respond to the fuel crisis that you've spoken about. So, I mean, all of these things are ways that we really need to come together to um, make the most of the crisis, if I can put it that way. There's a crisis that is here. I mean, yes, it's a concern, but also an opportunity. So, I want to point us to another critical issue that you have in the report related to transnational organized crime and its impact, a growing impact across our region. And so, again, you do highlight the influence of TNOC, particularly through the trafficking of hard drugs such as methamphetamine and cocaine. To you, and based on the report, how do you see this as changing the fabric of our Pacific communities? And do you think that our current responses are keeping pace with the threat?
Of course, in terms of we are seeing it also in terms of amount of detection and seizures that are happening across the region. I think when the transnational organized crime strategy was launched in 2024, back then, I think in terms of seizures, we've seen how the seizures were detected in amount of kilograms and grams, but I think lately we've seen that the amounts that has been detected by law enforcement are found in tons. So that really, shows that I think our region is no longer just a transiting point for all these drugs that are coming through the region. And we're seeing also the impact of drugs and I think the AIDS epidemic in Fiji. So very unfortunate. But I think as a region, we continue to highlight the importance of a collective approach to this issue as well. Um, Information, I think, from law enforcement that we have already, and it's already made known on open sources. We know that the market is Australia and New Zealand. So we're finding the important thing is to really look at how we deter this transnational organized crime from affecting our communities, but looking at what is happening, the health impact of drugs in Fiji, and how if solutions are not being addressed, then this problem will eventually affect the whole region. I think in terms of my background before taking up this role, you know, Fiji has always been, uh, what happens in Fiji will almost like funnel down into the whole region. We don't want what's happening now in Fiji to spill out into the region. But to ensure that we stop this in Fiji is we need to find solutions as to how we can resolve this matter. So I think there are regional meetings that are happening soon that is going to look at ways to improve the way law enforcement operates, the way law enforcement share information, and also around awareness, because I think um, the community may feel like they're being isolated from all these issues and not being involved in finding solutions. So, yep, it's a serious issue, but one that we need to collectively look at as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Papali Monalisa. And yes, your particular experience as a former assistant police commissioner in Samoa gives really important insight into this issue. Thank you very much for that response. Vili, anything to add?
I really want to emphasize what Mona Lisa said. In Fiji right now, 1% of the population has been tested positive for HIV. So that points to a much greater number of people that are living with HIV. And as evidenced by the statistics, together with large seizures that were being caught in Fiji, it links up very, it synchronizes the time that these diseases were being found, the spillover of drugs into the local market in Fiji with the increase in HIV rates. So it goes back to that issue that you were talking about, Joel. For me, like the real danger, and as Mona Lisa said, we are in danger of losing a whole generation there in Fiji, the youth, the youth that we have now. The huge number of people being detected are between the ages of 20 to 29, and that's our youth. These are the people that we are going to be relying on to run Fiji in the next 15 to 20 years, when we are long gone. So for me, the issue is, can be law enforcement driven. But I think one of Mona Lisa's competitors also said that you can't arrest yourself out of this crisis. It needs to be, as she has said, a whole of government, a whole of society, a whole of community approach, where the solutions are developed and led by the whole community, and not just law enforcement.
Monalisa, you mentioned there are a number of regional dialogues, meetings, where ministers, senior officials, experts will come together to talk about a regional approach and a collective approach for countries, not that are not Fiji, that are really looking upon the things that are happening here and wanting to, I guess, shore up or protect themselves. What measures do you think they can take to do that?
I think in terms of a regional response, whilst not all countries are part of PIFs, but certainly there's a number of agencies, regional agencies that are also looking into this issue, whether it's health, whether it's social sectors. Those are the agencies that I feel will also need to contribute. And when I say contribute, is making sure that the message or decisions that are being made at PIFs funnel down all the way to those people at the community level, because they need to understand what has been discussed. And I think sometimes we lose that in terms of sharing the information from the top all the way down to that frontline officer, so that they also take ownership of this response. There's also, I think, now with technology being made available and right across the region, there's connectivity is making information easier for us to access to. It's just a matter of making sure that we provide appropriate links to those at the community and those who are not, because we can't bring everyone to Fiji for a summit or for a dialogue of discussion. One solution in Fiji might not be the best solution somewhere up north, but understanding that this is how Fiji is dealing with this situation, it can also form an understanding and help each community respond better to the impact of you know um, drug drugs in our communities.
Mm. Thank you so much, Monalisa, for that. Colleagues, a lot of our discussion has been on the threats and challenges. Maybe as a closing question to you both, focused on, as you mentioned before, Vili, the ocean of peace. The Ocean of Peace Declaration has been, presented in the report as as a political anchor for our region. Taking that, into account, for you both, what would, success look like if the vision and the aspirations of the Ocean of Peace were to be fully sort of realized in practice?
Mm.
Thank you. I'll open it up.
Mm. For me, the Ocean of Peace, you've correctly termed it as a political anchor for all of the Pacific efforts, I guess, because I think in order to have peace, you need to have good progress economically, trade-wise, socially, culturally, everything. It all plays into this element of how we not only build but then sustain and strengthen peace across all of the Pacific. To me, also, I think success for me would really be the Ocean of Peace being an intergenerational commitment, just like the 2050 strategy is. It cannot be something that this current crop of Pacific leaders have agreed to. And then somewhere 5 years down the line, because leadership changes across the Pacific, we need to be trying to reinforce or relitigate some of the commitments that they've made, that our current crop of leaders have made. And for that, Joel, for me, really success is not only about us holding our external partners to account through this Ocean of Peace declaration, but it's also about holding us, the Pacific ourselves, holding us to account for the commitments that we have made under this declaration and other declarations that we've made.
Thank you, Vili. Maybe to add to the analogies, like any good partnership or even marriage, you have to recommit to the
Yes,
vows
yes,
every now and
yes.
then, right?
That is true.
Otherwise, something might go a bit wrong. So
commitment.
commitment is the key. But thank you so much, Vili, for that. Monalisa, I'd love to give you the final word on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. I think for me, when we talk about the Ocean of Peace, and really the emphasis is on peace. I think we are at a juncture where it's important when we talk about peace, we are inclusive, and with that, I think we've seen how the lenses of a certain particular group of security experts does not include the views of others. And I think as a collective, we need to ensure that the discussions around and the contribution to peace is including men, women, children, and the whole community. And I think collectively, if everybody understands, then everybody will have that contribution and will take value and take pride into making sure that our region continues to be a blue Pacific. So that's, I think, for me, what it means to what it means for me personally, about what peace is all about, is about including the views of others when discussions are being made around the important issues that are affecting us all, and not just a very limited number of representation. I think all of us even myself and director, probably when we got appointed into this role, it's important to really see the whole Pacific from like a helicopter view and understanding why things are the way it is. And I think the Pacific Island Farm Secretariat will make a really good platform to provide that sort of um, renewal of vows to our political leaders who are coming through, because they deserve to understand. And we are mindful that leaders and directors, regional, are all in their positions at a certain point in time, and not a lifetime role. So to ensure that there's a continuous commitment is making sure that they feel they have a part to play in our efforts for Ocean of Peace.
Malo lava, Samoa. Monalisa, thank you so much. Before we end this afternoon, is there any final comments or statements either of you would like to make?
Eddie, you first.
Yeah. Thank you, Joel. And thank you to the Pacific Security College for inviting us to be part of this panel. We are very truly honored to be asked to participate and really to have the opportunity to talk more and explain more about the Pacific Security Outlook report.
Thank you so much, Monalisa. Vili, thank you.
Thank you, Joel. And just to echo what Monalisa said, when you read through the report, it may seem very bleak and very discouraging. But I just want to also say that the Pacific, we are not passive. As you read through the report, under each of the thematic areas, you will see the opportunities that we are talking about that the Pacific can look at in order to address some of these threats and risks and concerns that we are facing. And a lot of those opportunities, if you look at it, there are already work that is being done at the regional level. All we are calling for is that we need to accelerate and strengthen and really fully resource some of these efforts, lines of effort that we are putting into place. So I just want to tell our listeners, if you read the report, it may paint a very bleak picture, but rest assured we are not passive. The Pacific, we are fighting back as a collective to address these concerns. So rest assured of that. And again, just to echo what Monalisa had said, really thank the Security College for allowing us this opportunity to come on and talk about this report. This is our annual report. It's our flagship product, and it's available to everyone. Not all our products are available to members of the public, but this is the only product by the center that is publicly available. And we encourage you all to have a read as you listen to this podcast, but also have a read of the report. And then we're always happy to receive feedback on that product, and it's there as well in the report how you can get in contact with us. But again, Joel and the Security College, thank you so much for the opportunity today.
Thank you very much, Vili. And it leaves me to again say a big congratulations to the Pacific Fusion Center and also the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat for the publication and the production of the Pacific Security Outlook report. Thank you both sincerely for your time this afternoon. It's been a wonderful discussion, and hopefully we can do this again sometime in the future. Let me also thank our audiences and our stakeholders from across the Blue Pacific for joining us for this episode of the Pacific Wayfinder podcast. Of course, we wish you well wherever you are across the Blue Pacific continent, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Goodbye for now.